Hey, welcome back to Succession Stories. I have an amazing guest with me today. This is going to be an emotional conversation, I think, in a lot of different levels. My guest and I met at a Exit Planning Institute local chapter event, and we became fast friends because I know we both agree on how important this topic is. And then he also attended a presentation that I did. And afterwards, he said, Hey, if you want to talk about ugly exits, let's have a conversation. And what an introduction. He had an unplanned, unwanted exit, and he learned a lot of lessons that he's applying going forward. He's the former COO and CEO of a multi-million dollar family owned business. Now, he's a strategic coach because he helps business owners and executives design a strategy for their next big act. So important. His firm is called Serving Strong Enterprises. Welcome to the show, Scott
It's
Couchenour.
it's great to be here. Thank you, Laurie. And I'm amazed how often my last name does not get pronounced right, and you did it just perfect.
Prep goes a long way, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Couchenour is a great name, and we're going to say it a few times so people remember it. I want to ask right out of the gate, Scott, a very important question. You've been at this a while. You've seen a lot of companies go through some tough times. What continues to surprise you at some of the biggest downfalls companies face when they go through business transition?
I think over the past several years, what I have noticed, and it started out what I noticed in my own life, but I see it everywhere, and it is uh, this this need or the feeling that you need to be in the system. You need to be so busy doing all the stuff in your business that you have no time, and it all squeezes out the ability to work on your business or on your life. The distress and the tyranny of the urgent, the death by a thousand cuts, whatever metaphor you want to use, it's just running rampant, especially among business owners. They're just so busy working in the business that they don't even have time to pull back and think about what's really going on and where they're really headed in a holistic approach.
Yeah, I see that too, and I feel it as an entrepreneur. It is a very strong pull. It's like a magnetic force that pulls
Hmm.
us into the business because we have to solve problems, and we are so driven, and we have the ideas, and we have the know-how and the relationships, and no one can do it better than us, and which
Right,
is sometimes very false, sometimes true, but sometimes false.
right,
And the more dependent our businesses are on us, it can cause a lot of problems, especially
right.
down the road. In the short term, we can't see it. It's like the forest for the trees. We can, as you said, whatever metaphor, but it is very true. Um,
Mhm.
I'm curious about your experience. As I alluded to in the introduction, this is a cautionary tale, and I would love to learn about your succession story. Tell me about the family business and what you experienced.
Yeah, sure. Our family business, we were a national design build firm, and we specialized in church construction because my dad was a preacher's kid. And back in the 60s, he was my dad's dad, my grandpa was going through a building program. The contractor at the time had inflated the final invoice and skipped town, leaving the church without funds and without a finished project. Well, my dad was still going through his own, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Because his job was in jeopardy. And he just stepped in and helped his dad, helped grandpa find financing, got the project finished. And someone said there ought to be a company exists to see this never happens to churches again. So that's what was the origin story of our family business. We started helping one church and another church. And before long, over the next several years, dad had grown it big enough so that all five of his kids could have the option to join if they wanted to. I chose to join when I was 24 and I became the COO. Did that for 24 years. And so that's what we did. We designed and built churches all across America. We were doing anywhere from 35, 40 million a year, had 70 employees, and we subcontracted out all of our work. And it was very rewarding. Uh, when all was said and done, it was about 760 projects that we had built in 44 years. Um, what really became the beginning of the end was the 2008 financial challenges. And we didn't really know it at the time. We figured it was just another downturn that we'd have to tighten our belt and make it through. But after 5 years of struggling with our sales, 2013, the board of directors had asked me to become the CEO with one specific goal, and that was to reinvent our 40, at that time, it was about 30, 40 years old, uh, reinvent how we did what we did. And so I got to work on that. And we were in about 2.5 years into that reinvention with the survivors of the employees that were still with us. And we had $20 million under contract in various stages of design. Now, we didn't make money until they went into construction, so we knew they were out there. And it came down to one project that had to start in June of 2015. And it came to June, and I got a call from the project manager. It ended up being the call that would change my life forever. I mean, quite literally. I got the call from the project manager expecting to hear that we got the project started. Instead, he said, "Are you sitting down?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "The pastor had been having an affair with the secretary, and that news came out." Um, this was the final option that we had. So I ended up closing the business. We went through bankruptcy over the next six months, and I went into a tailspin. I had no idea who I was because my identity was wrapped up in this whole business over almost 30 years. I lost my income. Both my wife and I worked in the business, and I lost a career. And spent about 18, 20 months just trying to figure things out. And slowly but surely, um, through a lot of wisdom and a lot of guidance from God. I'm a believer. I have faith, and a lot of thinking. I'm a thinker. I do a lot of. There's so much going on in my head so many times, but I began to realize that I had these ingredients, and these ingredients included. I became a certified coach back in 2000. I was a COO for 24 years. I was on the boards of nonprofits. I had all these ingredients, but what was missing was some sort of a recipe or strategy. And so I began to work on a strategy for going forward. And I began to realize how important that was, that I looked back at who I was in 2008 and beyond, and decided I was living by default.
There's
So that
an amazing story there, Scott, and it's a tough story, I can imagine, right? A 44-year-old company, this was a family business, and the shock of it ending the way it did. As you look back, I know you said you're a thoughtful person, and I'm sure you've thought through this many, many times. Were there any signs before you got that final, hey, this client situation's in a bad spin here? Were there any other signs along the way or things about the business that you said, I just wish we could have changed this or changed that prior to the end?
that is a very good question. One of the things I wish, well, it's funny. I go back to February before we closed, February of 2015. The bank came to us and said, "Look, you've got a line of credit that's maxed out. In order for you to renew that, we need the stakeholders to sign personally, and you need 100,000 off the line in order for us to keep going." Now, at that time, we knew what backlog we had. We knew that we were in a business that was very rewarding. We weren't building brothels or terrorist camps. We were building churches, shelter for worship and ministry, and we believed in what we did. So we signed personally. Now, looking back, would I have done that? I don't think I would have, but I'm not sure because we did it because of what we believed in. To answer your question more directly, it really comes from a book I read after we closed our business by Jim Collins. Not the famous one that he's very famous for, Good to Great, but he wrote a book after that called How the Mighty Fall. And in that book, he describes 5 stages of decline of a business. And I remember reading that thinking, oh my word, Jim Collins followed us and documented everything we went through. The first stage answers your question. It's called hubris, born of success. We, at the time 2008 hit, we were about 38 years old. We were successful for so many years. I can remember us saying in 2009, 2010, 2011, we can't figure this out. Why can't we continue the way we have been? Because it's been successful all these years. Hubris is not a prideful thing per se. It's not like, well, you can't hurt us kind of thing. It's more like, no, we know we're good at this. And yet that hubris kept us from investigating something that we could be doing different. We didn't try to prove ourselves wrong. We didn't try to revisit these years of success. And I think that was the main thing. If we had been able to pull back and say, okay, maybe this isn't just a downturn. Maybe the entire economy has shifted so dramatically that we need to reinvent ourselves. Now, we finally got to that in 2013, 5 years later. But that's what made us vulnerable from a cash flow standpoint to one single project that had to start in June of 15. So that 5-year slide is what made us vulnerable.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things as we look at businesses and try to understand where risk tripwires are. In your situation, there were maybe a couple that stand out to me. If you're okay with us workshopping a little
Sure.
bit here, so there was a client concentration, revenue concentration, and there was a lot of eggs in that basket with this particular project that was slated to start. The other thing, if we take a step back and look at it, you said that you designed and built churches. That's also a pretty it's an interesting niche, right? And on the one hand, it's a niche, but on the other hand, if something goes wrong, you don't have a diversified client base.
Right.
So that's another observation. Was that ever discussed as kind of broadening out the types of clients you serve?
It was not discussed at the time. We felt it was diversified in and of itself. However, we did begin to see signs of a declining construction market. And I don't believe we did enough about that. Um, if you look at the church construction market today, 10 years later, it is totally different. And we would have had to reinvent ourselves anyway. I think the big lesson here is that we didn't stay nimble enough in our methodology. We held too tightly to it, and the success kind of bolstered that approach. But I think the first couple of years of decline, we should have pulled back and said, what's really going on in the business, in the industry? What instead of just full guns forward continuing, we needed to look at, well, for example, before 2008, there were smaller contractors who would never bid against the church they attended. It was just too risky. Now, they might be one of our subcontractors, but they would never bid against us because they didn't want to take all that risk. Now, 2008 and 9 and 10, they got really hungry. So now all of a sudden our competition base shifted, and we weren't prepared for that.
Yeah, I get that. What about cash flow? You mentioned in the book that from Jim Collins, I'm sure cash flow is a big part of what he talks about. In a design build where there's a lot of fits and starts, right? It's kind of like you were saying, you do the design, but then you don't really start to get paid until you're doing the construction. Tell me about that. How did that impact the business? And what do you think you might do differently if you were going to advise a design build business today?
Cash flow was the thing that killed us. And I chuckle inside every time hear someone say that cash flow is king. Cash is king. Because unless you've been through what we've been through, you have no idea how important cash flow is. It is, it's the blood. It's the lifeblood of your business. Here's what I would have done differently and what I would suggest to contractors or any business for that matter. If you've got a line of credit, there needs to be a gate that triggers very serious discussions. For example, when you reach, let's say you have $1 million line of credit, you reach 250,000 of that line of credit. Once you reach that gate, you have got to pull back and say, what's going on? What really, I mean, ask yourselves very hard questions as though you were maxed out. If you can't come up with a good explanation for why you're that far into your line of credit, then you have got to do things differently. Had we reinvented ourselves in 2006, 7, 8, 9, would have been a totally different story.
What do you think you would have done to reinvent?
Well, I know what we did do. We, instead of extending ourselves all over the United States, we were in the process of pulling back and taking a project that we were currently constructing, and we were about 40% in into a project. In this would have been the year before we closed business, and we were going to draw a radius around that project of a certain mileage and canvass all of the church construction in that radius, have them come to this project as a living, breathing business card and say, by the way, if you've got a small project that you've been putting off because of cost, all of these subcontractors are already mobilized, and we could work out something that would be affordable and allow you to get something done you didn't think you could. And then we would eventually become known as the team that surrounds the local market with all things construction. And we, would we have built $2, $3, $4, $5 million churches? Probably not. It would have been more of a servicing of all things construction related to all the churches in that radius. And that's where we were headed. Then we would build another church somewhere, do the same thing, build another church and build it. And we would have these ecosystems, very lean and mean, small team that would mobilize subcontractors to do construction work, repairs, maintenance, all that sort of stuff.
I want to talk about the transition that you experienced. You said it was dark days and about 12 to 18 months and maybe until you came out of it. Tell me about what you experienced there.
It was extremely demoralizing. When we chose Chapter 7, when we closed the business, we had no other choice. At the time, we didn't think we had any other choice. The bank that we were working with would not cooperate enough for us. Now, we had two family businesses at the time. One was the construction business. The other was a real estate company, an LLC that leased the land and the building to the construction company. So we had to close both of those. Everything that was a part of my career and that I held dear was gone. And on top of that, my wife and I had to go through credit counseling and answer these credit questions that were just basic. Do you realize that you need to spend less than you make? And we knew all that. But what we did was we signed personally because of what we believed in, and that now we had to pay the price. It was I think aside from all of that humiliation and demoralization, something that stands out more than anything else was I felt like I lost my identity, because people would say to me in those days, "What do you do?" I'd go to a networking event. "What do you do?" "Well, I'm the CEO of a multi-million-dollar national family-owned business that designs and builds churches." And I got affirmation. "Oh, that's cool. That's really amazing. What a neat business." And I listened to that, and I had not done what I now know every one of us business owners needs to do. I equated who I was with the role that I played. It was all the same ball of wax, and it's not. And I wrestled with that more than anything.
Wow. Yeah, I can understand and I can empathize. And thank you for kind of being very authentic about how that situation felt for you. I can understand, and it was probably very challenging for both you and your wife and your family, um, and the extended family that you had for employees. We live in a fairly small environment, right? There's
Right.
always 2, 3 degrees of separation. You run into people. You're talking about what you do. The identity is not a surprise to me that you felt so tied in. It was again, a family business, multi-generational, and you had an intention of taking it ahead, forward and growing it. And
Absolutely.
that didn't happen. And it happened suddenly. And so we as humans if we plan it and we make it happen, these adjustments can be more accepting over time. But when it's such a hard stop, and it was a dramatic hard stop, and it impacted you in significant ways, then it's really very, very challenging. Did you seek any help to get through the emotional crisis that you were feeling?
I had a couple of board members in our family business that I leaned on pretty heavily, and they helped walk me through and help me. One of them said, "Look, you've got to deal with you got to protect your employees, then you've got to protect your clients, and then you got to protect your and then you address your creditors." And that gave me a framework to work with. So we did everything we could to extend any kind of health care to all the employees for at least another month to give them some time. Then I communicated to all the churches that we had under contract about this, what was going on. And I had negotiated with another contractor to convert the contracts over to them so that they would be served well. And then the way we handled the creditors was the bankruptcy. We just did everything we could. Um, just a side note, we had we had paid off one of our cars personally early. We just had done that as a course of who we were, and unfortunately, in a bankruptcy situation, um, we had equity in that car, so we either had to give them the car or give them the value of the car. So in essence, we paid for that car twice
Yeah,
because we needed the car.
right.
These are the things that go on. It's just horrible. And now I want to say something about what you said. It happened so quickly and suddenly. Yes, it was a phone call that changed my life forever. Um, that phone call in June of 2015, I literally, quite literally, have a life before June 2015 and a life after. But it didn't happen overnight. That's the thing about running a business is keep your eye on what one board member called the ignition questions. Keep your eye on the ignition questions. I said, what do you mean by ignition questions? He said, well, imagine the CEO of a business who comes early before anybody else and leaves late before and leaves after everybody leaves. They're going out to their car in the parking lot or parking deck, stick their key in the ignition. What are the questions that owner needs to know the answer to every night when they go home? What are your ignition questions? And I think that's we did not I did not have those answers in order to make the changes when they needed to be made. So it didn't happen overnight, and it did. um, it's not like we became dependent on one project from a cash flow standpoint overnight. That over a period of 10 years or so. It took us 5 years for the board to say something and say, we've got to do something different. What we're doing is not working. But I think had we superimposed um, an oversight to actually what was going on in the midst of our success with options, kind of a what if scenario, I think it would have been.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the chapter you mentioned of, again, part of the book from Jim Collins, Hubris, Born of Success, is a giant watch out for us as we move along our days, try to do the right thing, try to have the right ignition questions, and we can't get too confident in how things have always been. You can't do what you've always done and get what you always got, right? We have to be looking ahead and understanding, well, another love these analogies. Where's the puck going and skating there? But what do we
Mhm.
need to make sure that that puck gets to where it needs to go? And that's the tough part. And that's why we have advisors like you and advisors like me and others who are trying to help business owners. We recognize that they can't do this on their own, and we need good
Right.
guidance. Now, you had a board, you had
Mhm.
advisors, you had good people in the company, but we still missed a few things, and that can happen. And I appreciate that you're willing to share what you've learned, because people listening are probably saying, oh, wow, I need to really be checking in on those things. And so
Yeah.
some succession stories are 100% amazing, right? And some succession stories are not. And I do find that we learn so much when these succession stories don't exactly go our way. We face a lot of challenges. So again, I appreciate you sharing the challenges that you experienced, Scott. You went through a transition, you went through personal transition, financial transition, business transition, all three legs of that stool. And then you found your calling. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how you decided that you want to help entrepreneurs and work through their transitions. And I think did you call it the back nine? Is that what you call it?
The fourth quarter,
The fourth quarter. The fourth
right?
quarter. So tell me about that. How did you come to that decision?
Well, there was a point in a couple years after when I hit the wall. My wife had landed a job shortly after we lost our business, which gave us health insurance and gave us a little bit of cash. And 5 years later, in 2020, I'll never forget. She came to me and said, "You know, my fifth year anniversary." And Lori, I can't tell you how deeply that impacted me. It was like I hit a wall that I didn't know was there. Completely surprised. I couldn't believe I'd played around trying to figure out, am I going to work for somebody, or am I going to build my own business? I kind of did both. I was kind of straddling the fence. When she said that she in her new position for 5 years, that that was like almost a defibrillator. It shocked me into rhythm, and I hired a branding coach, and we started looking at all the stuff that I had, everything that's about me and everything that was out there. And long story short, we began to realize that I am uniquely gifted to work with people who are, at that time, we were thinking Gen X. I was going to work with Gen Xers in business. That then morphed. I began to look at the lifespan of an American male being about 78 years. Females were about 81 years. So I rounded it to about 80. And I figured, what if we looked at our life in 20-year segments and what that life cycle is all about? The first 20 years, then I labeled our learning quarter. That's first quarter. We're learning, we're being nurtured, we're going to school. Then we break out into ourselves, out on our own in our 20s and 30s, our second quarter. I call that the building quarter. This is where we're building our life, our career, our name, our family. Then we hit the third quarter, which is our 40s and 50s, and I call that the reaping quarter. We begin to reap what we built in the second quarter. Kids are getting older; they can watch themselves. And we've got a more over 50% paid down, all that kind of stuff. Then we hit the fourth quarter, our 60s and 70s, and 80s now, and maybe 90s. And I thought, and I really believe this. I began to think, by the time you hit your 40s as a business owner, your fourth quarter, not your 40s, your fourth quarter, and you go through an exit, and that exit requires some sort of a sale, you're going to have more resources than ever before. You're going to have more time than ever before. And over these years, you've accumulated wisdom and knowledge from the experience. Now, when you can combine those elements with a sense of urgency, because you're beginning to look face to face with mortality, my view is, and this is why I love coaching and doing what I do, my view is we can have more of an impact in our fourth quarter than all three quarters combined that we lived, because of these factors at play, with that kicker that sense of urgency. A lot of people have started things and gotten involved in things in their 60s and 70s that have made a profound impact. And what that means to the business owner who is wrestling with the emotions of exiting. The term exit is terminal. It carries with it a finality. And I think the for the advisor, it would be wise for them to recognize that dynamic because we are humans first, business owners second. And I guarantee at some level, even the type A driven entrepreneurial person, deep inside, they're wondering, I'm exiting this thing. What will I do after that? Well, I want to tell them, look, not only are you exiting, but you're entering the most vital time of your life. So take everything that you have learned in this business, separate your identity from it. It's not you, it's an expression of you. And let's find some other expressions. And if you can have something to enter while you're exiting, it's so much better off.
Absolutely, 100% agree. And for people who are business owners, it can be very relatable to hear the word exit and think, oh no, this is such a binary thing. I'm in, I'm out. I like to use the word transition for a reason because it's a process. It's a process of going from here to there. And having that cold start can be the toughest part, just getting started and thinking about, well, what might I be doing? How might I spend my time? I spent years thinking about a portfolio of things so that I didn't just have one thing. Because many,
Right.
many times in my career, I was tied to that one thing and my identity. I was so proud about where I worked. It wasn't my company, but I was all about it. I was this apparel company or this software company or whatever it was. And then finally, I reached a point in my I guess third quarter,
Mm-hmm.
um, where I'm saying, there's more to it than that. I'm more than just an employee of somewhere, right? Or if we're an owner, I'm more than just an owner of something. And figuring that out is not easy. I like your process of how you went through and described that. I think it's also a very interesting exploration for people who are working in a company. Maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your friend. And as we get into our 50s and our 60s, sometimes those positions are going away. There's a lot of changes happening right now. I have a friend who has been at a firm that does some government projects, and so they don't have the grants anymore. And after 30 years, her last day is today, actually.
Um,
And that's upsetting. It's upsetting, and I don't think that everybody's really preparing the way that we could be. And it's a prepare, but it's also just life, right? We
mhm.
have so much to us. You're not just one thing. You're not just a dad or a mom. You are a number of things. And how do you embrace those things? And for those of us that are inclined to make a living out of those things, we can put it together and we can have this next phase. I think the data also, we saw it around COVID, especially. There were a number of people in their 50s, leaving corporate America and then starting businesses. And I love the Ray Kroc, McDonald's stories. There's so
Mm.
many amazing stories of entrepreneurs that are in their 50s and 60s that went on to fantastic success. And so our life's not over. We're not over because
Yeah.
we left that company or this, our doors closed or we've got to keep moving and we've got to do it in a way that's very fulfilling. How do you work with people to figure out that fulfillment in their next phase in the fourth quarter?
Lloyd, that's the most exciting part of what I get to do. First of all, every time I get a chance to talk about this or work with a client or work with an advisor to help them work with clients is a form of redemption of that major loss in my life. And so what you're touching on right now is one of the most vital things. I call it vocational alignment, right? It's one of the 6 hallmarks of a strategic plan that I work with my clients who are both business owners and executives. Executives who are leaving a career after 30 years go through very similar things, not exactly like a business owner, but there are many similarities. So your friend who is leaving that career, they're wrestling with similar things that a business owner would. The vocational alignment. First of all, I define vocation not as a job, not as a 1099 or a W-2. It is what you give your time, energy, and attention to. Now, as a business owner, you've given your time, energy, and attention to this business. You've given your heart and soul to it. That has been your vocation, but a vocation doesn't have to turn into income or pay or equity or ownership. It is what you give your time and energy and attention to. So that's one thing. The other is this metaphor that came to me, I don't know, a couple of months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, and I call it moonshine. And I don't mean the drink that lights you up. I'm talking about sitting by the side of the ocean or a lake and on a full moonlit night, and you're looking at the waves and the moon just reflecting off the waves. For many people, that's a very romantic view. The full moon, a moonlit night on the ocean. The truth is, it's the sun shining on the ocean in the middle of the night. The moon has no properties that give it the ability to emanate its own light. All it's doing, because of its proximity, it's reflecting the sun. But we call it moonshine. The full lit moon, a moonlit night. It's not a moonlit night, it's a sunlit night by way of the moon. So what does that mean to the executive or the owner? The owner is the sun. Their role as business owner or executive is the moon. It is not what defines them. It is a reflection of who they are. It's other people's experience of them. Now, when I share that with my clients, I can almost see the load lifting off their shoulders, because this whole identity crisis, it is impossible for us to lose our identity, because we take our identity everywhere we go. It's just that we have been so used to the moon that we have reflected against for so long that we begin to think that's who we are, but it's not. If I give you an example, we have many moons that are expressions of who we are. When I get down and play with my 2-year-old grandson Wesley, and we're playing with trucks or Legos, that's a moon. That's Wesley's experience of me. That is an expression of who I am. If you're a member of a choir, that is a moon. If you're on a board of a nonprofit, that's another moon. I have a client who is the owner of a business, but he has a number of commercial real estate properties. That's another moon, right? So when we work together, the first thing I do with my clients is we rediscover the sun. We rediscover their identity. And that's made up of things like values, personality, strengths, what fuels their energy, what saps their energy. And we get our grips around who they are first, and then we begin to craft a path forward to some other moons. And Laurie, you can do a chat GPT and say, give me 100 options that a business owner could get involved in after they exit. And it's there. Boom, you got 100 options. It's not this abyss that many business owners struggle with. It is actually, and I love the word transition, it's a threshold. It is actually, for many, a launch pad.
It's a great way to think about it. Your identity, what lights you up, what brings you down, what are all these components as the sun, right? Reflecting off of you. It's a wonderful exercise. If we were going to shape that a little bit and say, okay, what are 2 or 3 things that you recommend entrepreneurs start doing today to prepare for business transition in the future? What would those be?
I'll tell you, the very first thing is get a book by Dr. John DeMartini called The Values Factor. Back in the day, several years ago, I would give my clients a list of 50 words, and they were to select 20 words that would resonate with them as their values. Then we'd pare it down to 10, then we'd pare it down to 5, and then they'd have 5 values. Then we'd go with that. What I found was that was very limiting and not very, it was too generic. It wasn't very tailored. Well, in this book, The Values Factor, there are 13 questions that I now incorporate. And there are questions like, take a look at your desk. and the surrounding area around your desk, what do you see? What is around? What's on your desk? And what does that say about what you value? That's one. It's almost like we put them in the middle of the room and then we walk around from 13 different perspectives. Another question is, how do you spend your time? And what does that say about what is important to you? How do you spend your money? Where is your money going? Look at your calendar. Look at everything that's going on. And over that exercise alone, we begin to develop what is deeply seated inside of the owner as to what they truly, truly value, regardless of the moon, regardless of the expression of who they are. What do they value? What is it that makes them unique? It is their purpose. It is the reason for which they were designed and put on this earth. Now, sometimes we discover values that we don't really like, like workaholism. I value being busy, but we dig into that and go deeper and say, what is it that you really value beneath that? So that's what I would recommend, is begin to get in touch with what you really value. And these are no nonsense questions. These are flat out very introspective, and I think they can go a long way for a business owner to begin to separate him or herself from that role.
Beautiful. I love that. Scott, there's a lot of things that inspire you. I'm sure there's great books. You've mentioned a few already. Is there a quote that comes back to you in your mind? It sticks out?
There's a quote that James Clear wrote in his book Atomic Habits that has stuck with me, and it is this: decide the type of person you want to be, and then prove it to yourself with small wins. The outcomes take care of themselves. What a simple but profound way of living. Who are you, or who do you want to be? Decide that you are that person and prove it to yourself with all of the multiple opportunities for decision making that you face every waking day.
Wonderful. That's a great quote. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to share today?
Well, there's one more thing I think that would be very helpful, and I wrestled with mentioning this with the last question that you asked me, but I think it's this: it's the principle that everything we face has context. There is always a bigger picture to anything we face, which means nothing is ever as bad as it seems, and nothing is ever as good as it seems. I think if I had seen context back in 2008 and 9 and beyond, I think we would have stepped back and said, okay, what is really, really going on? Instead of our microcosm and our success story and the stuff that we knew how to do, there are things going on. We have to step back and look at a bigger picture. And, I think a lot of people, going back to the very beginning, what I see is a lot of business owners are just too busy. They're too busy in the system. If they could carve out just 15 or 30 minutes a day just to pull back and notice what's going on, and that cadence of on the system and in the system will serve them well.
Well said. Well said. Scott, we have covered a lot of ground today, and I know there's people who want to reach out to you. What's a good way for them to find you?
Well, I live on LinkedIn. So if you search my name, Scott Couchenour, on LinkedIn, I'll be there. I'm on servingstrong.com. And if they want to just email me, it's coach@servingstrong.com.
Perfect. We'll also include those links in the show notes. Scott, thank you so much for coming on Succession Stories and sharing your story with me.
Laurie, it's been a pleasure. I love what you're doing. I love the business transition playbook. You keep doing what you're doing too.
Thank you. Thank you for your support. And thank you to all of our listeners. We really appreciate you tuning in today. If you enjoyed what you heard, why not like, subscribe, follow the show? Also, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Business Transition Sherpa is on YouTube with all the videos from Succession Stories and our sister show, The Entrepreneur Gene. This has been another fantastic, I hope you enjoyed it, another fantastic episode of Succession Stories, and we will see you next time.